Okay, hey, you guys, welcome to the next guest expert interview with Tammi Metzler from writeassociate.com. You guys, Tammi edited Brave Healing for me, and it was an amazing recommendation. Seriously, Tammi, I was nervous, right? A book like this was being put out by Possibilities Publishing Company, a small indie publisher. It was my first go at something that was felt like a step above just self-publishing, and I really wanted it to be good. I wanted it to sound professional, and I was okay with the writing part, but that editing, you guys, the editing is so key. And I can only say that now after having gone through it and having somebody like Tammi on my side who really got my book. First of all, I remember you sending me an email like right in the first week or two telling me that you were enjoying the book, that you were sucked in, that you felt like I was writing it for you. And when I read those words, I was like, oh, okay. I took a breath, I could relax. So the main group of ladies in the Brave Healers book writing mastermind are first-time authors, and they're all going to be shopping for editors. So I think I'll start with just a basic question of, do you have any tips for beginners on editing? I know that's a big question.
Sure. So do you mean self-editing, or if they're looking for some help?
Yeah, that's a great question, because one of the questions that Bonnie had was she wanted to know if you had any tips for self-editing before it went out to an editor. So let's start there.
Sure. Yep. So one of the first things that I recommend when you are done with your writing, I suggest that you take a step away. Now, how long you take a step away, it depends on what kind of deadlines you're on. I usually like to give myself at least a day, if not a couple of days, because the reason for that is when you come back to look at your work, you're looking at it with more fresh eyes. It's not, you've got a little bit of perspective from having a little bit of time away. So you're more likely to catch any little things that maybe don't sound quite right, that the brain kind of does a funny thing. When we're reading our own writing, we kind of will fill in the blanks, if you will. We know what we're trying to say. So even if words are missing or something, our brains just kind of fill it in automatically. So if you try to edit right away, it's almost like your brain's like, oh, I know what that's what that's saying. So it's good, even if you're missing a word or something. So that's what I recommend, because it's almost like you're coming in and looking at somebody else's work, if you at least give yourself a little bit of time, because you've had enough of that separation to do that. So that's really probably the biggest thing that I recommend, is just giving yourself a little bit of time.
That's a fantastic tip that I'm not really sure. I think I've heard maybe a version of that before, but for some reason it's clicking more today, because stepping away from it, it's like you just hit the pause button, go do something different, just get yourself out of that material that you've been so sucked into for, however long. That's awesome. Okay, so take a pause, go back to it, and then you can pick up on some of the things that, maybe you left out or mistakes you made.
Right.
Okay, so I think that most of the ladies are going to really appreciate a little education about the different kinds of editing that I would be hiring you for. In my case, I don't know. I can't remember if it was the whole thing I asked you to do, or just the proofreading, or just the developmental editing, but can you explain all those different kinds?
Yeah. So there's a few different levels of editing, like you said, that you can have somebody help you with. So developmental editing is sort of a bird's eye view, where somebody like me or an editor is going to go in and going to read through the entire manuscript and see if there's sections that maybe don't quite fit where they are. Maybe they need to be moved to a different chapter. Maybe it just doesn't quite flow as a whole. So they're going to look through the entire manuscript, just kind of taking that big view of it and making sure that everything is sounding good and everything makes sense the way it's presented. So that's kind of the big developmental editing stage. The most common stage that people hire me for is copy editing. And that is going to be when you're looking through and just checking to make sure that the actual sentences are making sense and that there isn't a word left out, or that somebody didn't do from instead of form, or something like that. Making sure that the punctuation is correct. Just all of that kind of things within the actual sentences. So the developmental isn't so much the writing. It's just making sure that it's kind of like fitting the puzzle pieces together. But the copy editing is where we're going in and actually looking at every single word and saying, okay, is that spelled correctly? Is that the correct form of accept? Because there's so many different weird spellings of things, and it's like the word could be spelled correctly, but maybe it's just not used in the right form. Right. So we're looking at that kind of thing. That spelling check's not going to catch usually. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at in the copy editing stage. So again, that's usually the most common stage that people are going to ask for in their work. And then the final would be the proofreading. And that's really just kind of going through and just making sure everything's spelled right. It's not really making sure that the sentences work so much. It's not making sure that, because the copy editing, let me go back for a second. The copy editing, there is some rewording sometimes if it's like, okay, I'm not sure if this is going to completely make sense to an outside observer. It's making sure it's kind of coming at it from that objective standpoint of saying, as a reader, I don't quite understand the meaning here. So maybe we need to either add a little bit more. Maybe we need to kind of rephrase this a little bit, just to make sure that everybody reading it is going to understand the intended meaning. So there's a lot of that going on too. Proofreading, again, is just a straight looking through to make sure that there's no typos, that there's no spelling errors, that the grammar is correct, that kind of thing.
Okay, awesome. I especially appreciate knowing the difference between what proofreading is and what copy editing is, because I think I was a little bit confused between those two. But let's see, I had a question. Oh, just a comment about the developmental edit. It was really helpful, you guys, because you're just sort of getting this draft out and you think you've got your order and you think you've got your parts, but what an objective outsider can be doing for you is saying, you know what, I'm not sure this makes sense to me, your ideal reader. Like, you missed a little explanation here, or this really belongs here. And Tammi, you did that for me so nicely. And I'll use the word relief, because I'm an okay writer. I was happy with my writing. It was just that when you have somebody from the outside look at it, all of a sudden you realize how to make it fantastic. And that's like, you guys are paying money for an editor because you want this thing to look and sound professional and good, and you want it to stand out that way. And so many people do not take the step of hiring an editor, and it's a big mistake, I think. It's my belief. So why don't you tell us just how did you get started in this, and how long have you been doing it, and tell us a little bit of your story.
Sure. So I have loved reading and writing pretty much for as long as I can remember. I mean, I was a little girl writing short stories and reading all the time and all of that stuff. So I have a degree in English, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. Everybody was asking me, are you going to be a teacher? And I'm like, well, I don't really think I want to do that. So I really had no idea. I didn't even know that this existed, that, you know, you could be an editor or even be a writer, you know, because I didn't know anybody who did that. So, so I just kind of, honestly, I kind of fell into it because when my daughter was born, she's 10 now, I really didn't like the job I was working at. So I wanted to try to find something I could do from home and I could be home with her. So I actually started a virtual assistant business. Mm. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I've been doing a lot of administrative work when I was working in the corporate, in different corporate jobs. So I started off offering those kind of services. You know, I was offering administrative stuff, secretarial type stuff. But I also had a little section that was for writing and editing, you know, like help. And I didn't really think a lot of it. I mean, it's something that I was really interested in, but I didn't have a ton of like professional experience in it at the time. So I didn't really think a lot of it. I was like, that'd be really cool if somebody would hire me to do that. But, you know, that's not really what I experienced in. And so I didn't really expect much, but that is what everybody came to me for. That's what everybody needed help with. I didn't have a single person hire me to do administrative work. So finally I was like, well, I guess I'll just take that, take that service away because nobody wants it from me, obviously. So that's kind of how I fell into offering it as a kind of a freelance type thing as part of my business. And so after my daughter was born, my business was not anywhere near up and running, but I just told my husband, I said, I can't send my newborn off to somebody I don't know. So I'm just going to go for it, you know, and he was on board. And so it's been almost 11 years now. So that's kind of how I got started, and it's evolved a bit. One of my very first projects was editing a book, which I loved. And then I've done also a lot of writing for people. I've done a lot of, I got into copywriting for a while, so I was doing that for people. But I didn't really love it a whole lot. So a couple years ago, I decided, you know, books are really my passion. It's what I love. I always am reading a book. I'm actually sitting next to a stack of about 20 books right now that's waiting to be read. And so I just decided, you know, I'm just going to focus on this. And I love the editing aspect. I love taking, you know, some really good writing and just making it absolutely awesome, you know, and just making it shine, and just kind of going through and playing with the words to say, you know, how can we make this so that it's really, you know, really pops. And so that's been probably about the last two years that I've been focusing exclusively on book editing, and I don't do any copywriting for people anymore. And so that's kind of where it's evolved over the years.
Awesome. Okay. So you got to tell us then what makes great writing, what makes it pop like that. Give my ladies a couple of tips to start this writing process off with.
Okay. So, I think one of the things is, let me think about that. That's a really good question. Gosh, let's see. Making sure that you're kind of as concise as you can be. And this is coming from somebody who rambles. When I write, I have a tendency to ramble, so I totally understand it. But trying to, I think when it comes to writing, less is usually more, in terms of, I guess less is more isn't really a good way to say it. It's more about quality being better than quantity. People have always asked me over the years when I was doing more writing, how long should books be? How long should articles be? How long, all of that stuff. Yes. And my answer to them always was, I don't really have a specific, oh, you should write an article that's 500 words or 1,000 words. It's more about get your point across as concisely as you can and make sure that it makes sense to people. And, you know, it can be funny or engaging or whatever, but that to me is more important than anything, is just make sure that you've got the point across. Because there's a lot of times when I'm editing something and it does, sometimes it'll go off topic a little bit. And I do it too when I'm writing. You know, you're writing something and you think about, oh, let's write about this because it makes me think of that. And, you know, you just want to make sure that you're staying really closely on topic. I think another thing would be, I know when I was doing a lot of copywriting, I would kind of try to play with words a little bit. And I do that too now, where I love the thesaurus. So a lot of times I'll try to take kind of common words and try to find good substitutes for them. And that's just kind of a personal preference, I think, but just kind of mix it up a little bit, you know, so you're not using the same, you know, standard words all the time. So I like to do that as well. So yeah, I think those are kind of a couple things just off the top of my head. If I think of any more, I'll share them with you.
Yeah. So what's the genre of book that you accept as an editor? Do you accept one kind more than another? I know mine was nonfiction, and it was a book in the, you know, health and wellness category. So what are your favorites?
Yeah, right now I'm only doing nonfiction, just because fiction is it's its own ball game, obviously, and it has its own rules and its own qualifications, and I do not have enough experience at this point to really feel comfortable diving into that. So right now I'm doing nonfiction, and you know, I've worked with people in so many different realms. I love things like what you wrote, Laura, that are, you know, really kind of lifting people up. I love that kind of, you know, motivational, inspirational, those sort of things. Those are probably my favorite. I would say I've worked with all kinds of different genres, though. I've worked with people in the financial industry. I just finished somebody who was working in the real estate industry, so he was writing about the real estate industry, and those are interesting as well. So, but I think probably my favorite would be the kind of things like you wrote, Laura, just really motivational and things like that.
Awesome. So this is for my one or possibly two ladies who are doing fiction. Do you have anyone to recommend? Like, who would you, if I'm calling you and I say I have fiction, do you have somebody for us?
You know, I'd probably have to look into that and maybe let you know.
Definitely,
right
let me know.
Now, yeah, because right now, most of the people that I'm working with are nonfiction. So I really don't have a ton of experience in the fiction genre right now. So I'd have to kind of look at it and see if there's somebody who stands out.
And I should have mentioned earlier that Honorée Corder recommended you to me, and her awesome group, the Prosperous Writers Mastermind, is kind of where I put that note and, you know, got your name, which is awesome. So I just never asked her for fiction yet, so I will do that. And I appreciate you saying that, you know, that's its own animal with rules and qualifications and things. So that's actually good for everybody to know, that you really want to make sure your editor is in that genre that you are writing, so that, you know, you get the right person. So, okay, Jennifer's got a question for you. Go for it, Jennifer.
I'm working with a writing coach, and he is talking me through the process. We're in the very beginning phases, so I'm really green at this. He's telling me that there has to be a healthy balance between showing and telling. And I know that, like with Laura's classes, we talk a lot about show, don't tell, show, don't tell. And I've been practicing the showing. Can you speak a little bit about the balance between showing and telling? Because I get all mixed up in what I'm supposed to be doing. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, it does. I think the more you can, I think it depends a little bit on what it is you're writing about. Show, don't tell, I feel it is more critical when you're doing storytelling, when you're doing, and not even just fiction necessarily. If you're doing something in your nonfiction book that is kind of painting a picture instead of saying, okay, here are the 3 ways that you want to, let's say, lose 5 pounds or whatever. Obviously, if you're writing more of a how-to type of thing, when you're in that moment of explaining what to do, then you are more in tell mode, if that makes sense. If you're telling a story to kind of illustrate what it is that that you want people to know, or what you want people to learn, then yeah, absolutely, showing is more beneficial in that standpoint. So instead of just saying, he felt really warm, you would say something like, his cheeks were flushed, his sweat was beading on his brow, or, those are kind of some examples of showing, instead of just coming out and saying, gosh, he felt really hot. It's more about using that language to say, to paint that picture for them mentally. And I think that's the bigger point for me, is helping the reader to become more immersed in your book by kind of when you're using that kind of language of showing, of saying like his cheeks were bright red and all of this kind of stuff, and he was sweating or whatever, they're actually painting a picture of that in their head, more so than if you just say, oh, he felt really hot. Usually when you see something like that, you don't necessarily create a mental picture, but if you think about it now, if you're thinking about somebody saying, his cheeks were bright red, I mean, you're actually at least I am, you're actually picturing that in your mind. And so it brings the reader in a little bit more. It helps to engage them more in your writing when you do things like that. So, you could absolutely, are you writing nonfiction? Okay. So you definitely could use it in those instances as well, just to really help to get them involved, if you will. Like, for example, one of my, and I'm going to use actually a sales page as an example. So I have a workshop that I've run before, and as part of the sales page, it actually goes through and it kind of paints a picture of what people would, what would happen for them if they completed this course that I was running. And it really kind of shows them, this is kind of what could happen for you. And so I think that's another instance of showing and helping just to get them more involved in what you're writing. Does that make sense?
That's awesome, Tammi, because everybody that you're talking to in the program is also an entrepreneur with sales pages. And so it's just a great example of where we can be showing a little bit and paint. I like the idea of painting the picture because we're drawn in like a movie.
Yep.
And we can have that going on in our head. And I think also with Jennifer's book, because it's going to have some pretty intense storytelling, but it's also going to have some tools and some science and some telling, like to get some of those points across. So I like your question about the balance, Jennifer. I think your book is going to automatically go between the two. And I think, so that kind of gets me to another question for you, Tammi, is I think we would all say that we want our draft that we send you for that very first time to be as clean as possible and as perfect as possible. But I don't know about everyone else, but I could drive myself completely insane trying to make it perfect and then never get it to you. Right. Because I'm always caught up in that, oh my God, this isn't good enough. She's going to think I'm a horrible writer. And it's not about that at all. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. Please don't feel that way, because, that's what we do when we come in as editors. I guess I can't speak for everybody, but when I'm coming in and looking at somebody's work, if I see a paragraph that kind of needs a lot of reworking, I get excited. I get excited about it. I'm not sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, what a horrible thing. I'm like, oh yay, this is awesome. It's kind of like, clay that you get to mold a little bit. So please don't ever feel like it's any kind of indication on you at all. And I know I do my own writing, and I've hired editors before, and there certainly is that kind of concern. But even with, the people I've hired and they've made, changes and stuff, and it's the way to look at it, I think, is just remembering that this is an outside perspective. This is somebody who is taking that look, is taking, when we are writing something and we are spending all of this time going through, and how much time do we spend writing a book? A lot of time, right? So we get so immersed in that it can feel like we just, we're beating our heads against a wall at some point, and we just can't really see the forest through the trees, right? So we need that outside perspective of that, having somebody come in and look at it. And now going back to what you said with, feeling like it has to be perfect, I think that's pretty common in, most writers. You always feel like something needs to be changed or something needs to be added. But I feel like you have to kind of get through, and as long as you feel like the main points have been made, and as long as you're comfortable with that, then as far as, the wording of things and all of that, you just kind of need to walk away. And I've done it for myself as well. At some point, you just need to say, you know what, I have said what I need to say. I've gotten my point across, and now I'm going to, I'm going to send it off to my editor. I'm going to give myself a few days and come back to it with fresh eyes, whatever the case is. So, and we just need to, I think, be a little more patient with ourselves and a little bit less hard on ourselves.
Yeah, and less attached. I think it's good to detach at some point and just sort of let go, let it go, and hit send, and then realize that it's going to be a learning process too, which was part of my journey. It was like, wow, I learned a lot after working with you and understanding where the pieces went. And I think that every book after that is just going to be better because of your help. And that doesn't mean you're not going to get my next book too. It just means that I'm going to be a little bit more confident about that next one that I send you. And that's all it is, really, because I'm certain you would take a draft in whatever form it's in and still be able to do the magic you do with it. It almost, I don't know, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost doesn't matter what stage that's in, because you're still going to see it as a whole thing. Right. And be able to give advice. And one other just quick point is, y'all, if your editor is like, you need to make this change, and it doesn't give you the option of saying no, that's the wrong editor. Like, so if there was a suggestion that Tammi gave me and I read it and I thought, you know what, I really want it the way I wrote it, that's up to you. So if there's this weird energy going on with, no, it has to be this way, or this is this is what it should have meant. No, because you're the author of those words. So ultimately you have the final say in how that goes down, right? And I loved working with you for that reason too, because you were very easygoing. You understood when I wanted to keep something a particular way, and you understood why. Mm-hmm. And it was like very low pressure, I guess I should say, and then I still felt really good about that book as a whole when it went out into the world. And I think that's like one of the biggest things. Jennifer, did you have anything else?
I do have one other question, and I'm just wondering how common this is. I recently had a guest on my podcast who is writing a book, and he mentioned that they were like in the 22nd or something, 20-something round of edits. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I've got to build up endurance for this. Is that normal?
That's a great question, Tammi. Oh my gosh, I hope you're going to bust this one up.
Oh, yeah.
But is that normal to go through that many rounds of edits? Because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I think my self-esteem would have plummeted way before that. So I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So I do know that in the publishing world, they do go through probably about, I think like more like 7 rounds of edits, maybe. would say that it's whatever you're comfortable with, but I think if you're going through 22 rounds of edits, I feel like it's kind of going back to what Laura said about just kind of needing to push and push and push and make it perfect. And you know what? Yes, you want your book to be great, and you want your book to say what it needs to say and to make the impact that it needs to impact, or that it needs to make. But there is such a thing as being too perfectionist and letting that get you to the point of saying, you know what, I'm not going to get this out here because this one little sentence isn't just perfect. I mean, I feel personally like that's too much. Like, you can go through, when I work with people on developmental editing, we'll go through the high phase developmental editing, and then we'll go through the copy editing, and then we'll kind of work together in between to talk about, let's see if there's any changes that need to be made or anything like that. And then we'll go through the proofreading, and then once they get the proofreading stage done, it's done. It's ready to publish. All of the changes have been accepted. All of the words have been checked for spelling and for everything, and the I's dotted and T's crossed, and you're good. I mean, I feel personally, just from the work that I've done, that those 3 stages are enough. They are so in depth that if you continue going through and rehashing, you can do that forever. I mean, really, you could keep going and keep adding things, and that's fine if that's what you want to do, but I don't feel it's necessary. I think you go through, you make sure that your points have been said and that everything feels good to you, that you feel like, you can do a final read through and say, you know what, this feels really good. And this feels like it's saying what I want it to say. It's getting the message that I really want to make across to people that I'm trying to help with this. Or if you're writing fiction, it's the story's good, and then let it go. I mean, that's my 2 cents.
I think that's what you're saying is so incredibly important. Oh my gosh. So I hope you guys are listening, because I mean, I've experienced people like Jennifer was telling us about, where you hear stories of stuff happening like that and you're like, whoa, that doesn't feel right. So what I'm going to say to you all is, right, that's not feeling right. So you just have to trust your instincts when you hear something like that, and realize the process can be very, very different. And that's, so you kind of said it already. Your process, Tammi, is you go through the developmental edit first. And so you would have sent me back something at that point, and I would make those changes in the document. Then I send it back to you, and you're doing the copy editing phase, and same thing happens there, and then like a final proofreading. So in those 3 stages of back and forth, there's you're making changes, and it's kind of tedious, and you have to go through your document and find all those changes and figure it out. But honestly, if I had to ever do 22 rounds of something for something I had written, it would have been thrown in the trash.
Mm-hmm.
I would have been so paralyzed that nobody would be reading my message and nobody would be being helped. And don't get me started on this topic, because when people who are out to change the world get paralyzed by stuff like this, by the perfectionism stuff, that you're done. So you haven't helped anybody, because you're thinking that it needs to be something so perfect, and then it ends up being nothing, right? So you gals have heard me say that message before. Please don't let that perfectionism paralyze you, and let go at some point, detach. And guess what? There's always the next book, because something else that paralyzes people is they think, well, oh my God, what if I change my mind about some tool I taught in book 1, for nonfiction people? Well, okay, that's what book 2 is for. Or that's what a revised edition of a book is for, right? So don't worry, gals, just get it out.
I'm glad you said that, Laura, because I was actually thinking of that, and I didn't get to that point. But yes, there is always another book. So I completely agree with that 100%. You get your message out, and then if you think of something else that's kind of like maybe related, but it's kind of its own thing, write it down, and that's your next book that you can work on. I 100% agree.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Jennifer, anything else? Was that it? Okay. So Tammi, what else have I not asked you that I should be asking you about editing? What would make your life easier if in this little relationship with your authors?
I'm not sure if there's anything that would make it easier, but I did want to say, just for people, like you said, a lot of these authors are somewhat new. They maybe haven't been through the editing process. And I do work with authors that are like that quite a bit. And I feel like sometimes they don't really understand the process. So I thought I'd maybe just kind of do an overall, this is kind of how it works, so people know, if that's okay. Okay, so typically when somebody has finished their book and they're interested in getting the editing done, usually what I'll do is I'll do a couple of pages of sample edits. The reason for that is there's a few different reasons. For one, it gives them a sense of what my work is like, to see if it is even a good fit. And also it gives me a good sense of what they're needing. So I can kind of say, I really don't think you need much more than maybe a proofreading. The flow is good. It's, maybe just kind of a general looking over for stuff. So I can help kind of make that recommendation for them. And then, so once we kind of make that decision and move forward, what happens is I receive the manuscript. So the author would send it to me in a Word document via email. And then I get started, and I'll tell them up front, I can tell them, based on, because I work by the word. So they will know right up front, this is exactly how much it's going to cost. There's no surprises. There's nothing like you get it back at the end and it's like, oh my gosh, it's like twice as much as I thought it was going to be. That doesn't happen. So so they know up front, and they know what the time is going to be. I tell them how long it's going to take. They know all of that. And then what happens with the actual editing is I make all of the changes, like, Laura, in using track changes in Word. So that, if anybody isn't familiar, that's where all of the changes that I make are marked in red, usually. Or sometimes it's another color, but usually it's red. And so that way you can very easily see any changes that have been made. You can go through, you can see what I did, you can either accept it or reject it. Like you said, Laura, if you feel like, I really think I want to keep it the way that I had it. So there's that option to do that. And then once you're done, if you choose to do the proofreading after that, then you send it back to me. And then once the proofreading stage is done, once you get it back, it's just done. Like if there's any changes that need to be made in the proofreading stage, like it's just grammatical or spelling. That's it. So usually I don't even send track changes with that, because really, unless somebody asks me to, but otherwise there's really no need for it, because there's such minor changes. It's nothing that changes the meaning of the book or anything like that. So once the proofreading stage is done, once that document's back, it's done. It's ready to be published. It is, you could just send it off. So that's just kind of an overall view of kind of just how the process works.
That's awesome. And let me just say, track changes was cool to learn. I had learned that on a writing retreat. And so there's the version for Word, and there's a version on the Pages for a Mac. And it all works, you guys, and it's not hard at all. And it's just really easy to see the changes as you move through the document, because there's a lot of scrolling going on when you're doing this, rereading your stuff and looking for the changes and all. So that was cool. And then there's one other thing that you said about that process that I wanted to say something about. I'm totally blanking. But for an average 30 to 40,000 word nonfiction book, it will take you how many weeks to move through that on that first round?
Yeah, usually about 3 to 4 weeks, and that's pretty standard. So if somebody's like, gosh, I'm really in a bind and they need something quicker, usually that can be accommodated. It just kind of depends on what else is going on. But usually it's about 3 to 4 weeks.
And
so that's a really good question. Yeah.
That's for the developmental alone or everything?
Yeah, the developmental stage is actually more like 1 to 2 weeks. So the copy editing is what's going to be the 3 to 4, because that's a little bit more in depth.
Okay.
So if you're looking at a stage of doing like developmental editing and copy editing, that's going to be like 6 weeks roughly. And then proofreading is usually about another 1 to 2 weeks.
Yeah, perfect. I think our process, you had told me in the beginning to plan for about 8. So your math worked out just now. Yeah, but it's good to know, because when you have no expectation and you think this thing is going to be turned around in a couple of weeks, and it's more like a couple of months,
right.
So just for my ladies to be able to plan at that stage where they're ready to hand it to you, Okay. That's really great. So you guys, if you have more questions for Tammi after listening to this, write, that's WRITE associate.com is where you're going to find her. And I think you've got a normal contact page on there where they can email you and all that shit.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I'm assuming that you can either chat on the phone or go back and forth by email if they have some questions about their thing or hiring you or.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Jennifer, last chance. Anything that came up for you before we sign off?
Nothing that I can think of in the moment, but thank you for the email and the opportunity to reach out if something comes up.
All right. I'm happy that you're able to join us this morning. And Tammi, thank you so much. This is, it's just been really fun to offer these kinds of guest expert interviews to my gals, because man, I wished I had this when I was going through the very first book I wrote, which was like back in 2012, and I knew nothing. So having somebody like you here to answer all these questions is just phenomenal. So thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, you guys, I'm going to sign off, and we'll post this up pretty quick. So again, if you have any questions, I'll type in the URL too on the link so that people can just click it.
Thank you.
Gals, see ya.
Bye.